And welcome, folks. This is the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House. We're continuing our discussion on possible future expansion of the State House. And we had some conversations at our last meeting about a couple of items. One was trying to look at the time frame of when certain architectural documents get done and what that process is. And we were talking about trying to jumpstart the process in terms of maybe seeing if we could work with our appropriations committees to work through the general fund budget adjustment and to put some money up front so that we could get some of the process started, so we don't have to wait until May of 2022 to get the process started. That's one item. And I'm very cognizant of, in that particular conversation of budgets, we receive a budget from the administration, we receive a budget adjustment from the general fund, and a budget adjustment from the capital bill as well. So the administration has their view, we're the legislative end at this point, and we have our view. So we have to be cognizant of that. The second thing that we talked about was when we get along in the process of developing these construction documents, schematic design, program design, that may trigger external reviews. And we wanted to know the timeline for that. And you're at a certain point in a design document, what does that trigger? And then you get a more refined design documents for construction. What does that trigger for review? So Tricia Harper worked on that. And we did send it out to you folks last Friday. And we do have the paper copies here as well. So that's what I'd like to get started with Tricia. Come up. Questions?
I guess, Mike, if you could call it the Excel policy.
Tricia, welcome.
Yes, hi, my name is Tricia Harper. I'm an architect, and I'm a consultant for the legislature. My company is the Architectural Restoration Consulting. So I am showing in front displayed here a time frame, a timeline of possible timeline for the State House expansion, and it is broken down from starting November 1st until 27, I think it is almost. I'm not sure what happened on one of those dates, got a little stretched. But what I have done is I have shown the different categories that we spoke about at the last meeting of design. The programming phase of design is in bold, as you see, and the schematic design document phase is another phase of design. Design development phase. Now schematic, so programming is when you come up with what you would like to see for spaces within your building, your building needs, really, not what you like to see, but what is needed for the building to function and where it lacks, what works now, such like that. We've already taken the Freeman French, we reviewed that last week in the comparison of the two, the Freeman French master plan of April last year, I think, and then the Feingold Alexander plan from 2004 and their schematic design and design development for their program.
So Chris, let me interrupt right there. So the programming, trying to figure out program needs within the building. By jump starting, if we can, doesn't mean we'll be able to do this. But if we can put some money towards this early in 22, could get this piece of the puzzle started, correct?
That's correct. And that's what this is sort of, the first piece we want to do, what we'd have to do to start that is to hire an architect to do the project that is so that they can develop review the programs that we have already. We have a good sense of what is needed. We talked about committee room spaces and sizes and present them with that program, saying this is what we think we need so far. And then they can develop their proposal based on those programs that we've already established, or not established, that we've already done and reviewed. And they take that program and they develop their RFP, their request, their proposal based on that program. That RFP, we would ask them to put in the cost for different phases of design based on that program. So that program is very key, that what we've done so far, and know that the building is going to be a certain amount square footage larger and how many spaces are, and it'll give them an idea of the scope of work on this project. Once they've got that program, once they have the RFP, they've also asked to do a schematic design, an estimate for how long it will take them, or cost for doing the schematic design. Schematic design is a sketch of what the program would look like in various forms. And we did talk about the form of the building is very key in this respect. The next phase is design development phase. After that, where you take the drawings further on from these sketches of approved, that's in another approval process that you need to go through. So every time there's a approval process, let's start on the program that we have an approval process in June for the program. And that's what is highlighted in red here. So it might be easier, but I don't know which one's easier for me to go up to.
Either one. So just to put this in context, if we can start the process for hiring an architect.
I'll jump in and at least get an understanding of the acronyms, and the one that isn't explained in here anywhere is R&A.
Oh,
And I just, this stuff is new to me, so a lot of what you're saying doesn't make any sense.
review and approve. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it would be helpful if you.
Sorry, Janet, where are you?
Where are you for review?
Right.
Review and approve. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh, RNA, got it. Got it.
it's here a bunch of times. And
Review and approve.
That one. Yeah.
Oh, it's always nice to learn a new one.
I think I got all the rest of them. They're all in when they're first. Hopefully. This is, I didn't write authority having jurisdiction. AHJ is authority having jurisdiction. Those are fire safety, historic preservation, natural complex. And
Okay, let's hang on. Before we get into that, I'm gonna hit it very basic because this is new to a lot of folks sitting around here that are not used to looking in this construction world. So if we can upfront the money ahead, if the programming piece in terms of what do we want in the building to occur, we need to hire an architect that would do all of that work and start developing, putting that into the form of a schematic design. If that occurs early enough in the session, we would be able to complete that by the beginning of June. Correct? Right, if we can upfront the money. You need that first before you get into developing schematic designs. Schematic designs will then give you the rough layout of what the new space would look like, the square footage for the new space, and where the committee rooms would be, where the cafeteria would be, and also start giving you some estimated dollar amounts for the construction. That would be occurring through the summer and early fall of next year. If you delay that money being appropriated at the beginning of this legislative session, it pushes that out further, okay? At the schematic design phase, this is the one thing we were interested in. What is triggered for review at the schematic design stage? So next summer, what would be triggered is historic preservation, fire safety, and the Capitol Complex Commission, is my understanding here.
Yes,
And that would be it for outside review.
I don't think we would do environmental at that point yet. Yes.
Because that was the question that we had as a committee. At what stages do we trigger outside review, and what are those reviews? So Laura, your hand went up. So did we miss something?
The National Park Service, because this is a National Historic Landmark.
Historic preservation.
No, it's separate.
It's slightly different.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm doing right now is I'm just putting those under the category of historic preservation, whatever we have to do to go through, but I can write that separately.
I put it separate because it could be separate.
Okay.
So Alice, it was historic preservation, Capitol Complex, NPS, and what's the,
Division of Fire Safety.
oh, that's right.
It's
fire.
halfway down. If you look at schematic design,
Yeah.
those lines underneath, the second line down. So that's a point where you just don't know then how long it's going to take from that point, and then what changes would occur. That's all we need to know is this committee at this point. We don't need to get into the weeds of all the other lines there for that.
Tricia, and I'm wondering, Capitol Complex Commission is a huge cog in this wheel, in my opinion. And I'm wondering if there's a need or a way to get them involved earlier with some conceptual conversations and those type of things. Because I think if you wait to get them involved heavily in, next December or next July, it could derail our whole conversation here. They will, you got them in at, looks like you have them in December, first spot for the Capitol Complex Commission. And I'm wondering if that's pretty late in the process, because their input would be valuable to the conversations of what we think we're headed down the right set of tracks and may not be.
I think you could have a generalized discussion with them, but to show them a drawing or anything at that point, that is a schematic design.
Right.
So yes, it could happen, could happen earlier. And anytime that you bring to them to say, this is the project, we're looking at, and we have the program, but the design is out right now, because you're not sure what you want for the design. And
I'm just thinking it would be easier to bring them on earlier than have them scuttle the project next December.
okay.
Well,
Allison?
I think that's true, Butch, for every one of them.
It is.
Laura is here for historic preservation and David and Trish.
But I think the Capitol Complex Commission.
Oh, I agree, but
It doesn't involve all legislators or all state employees.
I agree, but I think that the same could be said for all four of those entities. It would be
When
great.
we get down lower, Senator Clarkson, you're beginning to get into the technical piece of the thing.
Yeah.
Versus the conceptual piece of the thing. That's just my
Can
concern.
I just ask a quick question? Who is on the Capitol Complex Commission?
Alice, help.
How does it,
It is with the city of Montpelier.
They're
city, the legislature?
appointed by the governor
Governor.
and approved by the Senate. And there is one representative from the city of Montpelier. The commissioner is a member. There are, it would be fairly easy to keep them in the loop because PBS helps to administer that body. So we could certainly keep them in the loop early on. It's not hard.
So do you know when their next meeting is by chance?
They meet at the call of it whenever there's something to review. So they don't have a regular meeting. Heather Schuldeis is the chair. Yes, the current chair.
Good.
So the Capital Complex Commission would get more involved if we added on to the sides of the building versus just going up. They have more involvement, I would assume, if we added on to each side of the building versus.
They review any physical exterior changes to the complex that are significant. So any exterior impact is all that they would be looking at.
Which would include anything.
Right.
Right. So that would lay, if everything went as planned, and the schematic design was completed and the reviews by December of 22, would then lay the groundwork for the next legislative session to review those schematic design documents and proposals, to then make adjustments that would need to be made, and then start appropriating the dollars to continue to the next phase or the next part of creating your documents, which would be your design development, which you need before you get to your construction documents. So in order to take that next step from the schematic design to design development documents, you would need the legislature to approve the schematic designs, make any recommendations, and then appropriate the money to continue. And that would be during the session of 23. All right.
Another quick question. Representative Emmons, do you envision that we would appropriate the money? You're talking about getting the money early in next session so we can get going. So in the budget adjustment bill, is that what you're?
So we talked about.
Yeah.
Last meeting.
Yeah.
That if you want to jumpstart it, if you wait and do it through the process of the capital budget, which is really where the money would be, we wouldn't know that until we adjourn in May. If we could jumpstart it, and if we could work with our respective appropriations committees and say, can this be done through the general fund budget adjustment process? Which that bill sometimes gets completed in March, and then it could start. That's something.
So I guess my question is, if we don't do that, does that add a year on? My sense is that we those few months actually end up costing us a year. Is that right?
Steve and then Allison.
I just on a clarification on the schedule that you put together, Tricia, you have phase 1 and phase 2. I think last time we talked about phase 1 being the overbuild. Was that what you had in your mind when you were?
That's what I generalized, saying
Yeah.
that if you did want to phase it, you do the first phase of it within, the first 3 years or 4 years, whatever it is. And the next phase could come after that, or they could lap. This depends on what plan you come up with and what phasing is necessary.
Just further to that and to what Butch had been saying earlier, it's my understanding from the last large effort that went through the Feingold effort, that the potential outside group preservation especially was split on the building to the left or right of the building. And then if these design documents listed in this plan here recommended one or the other, and we got bogged down in that, it would push us off. But if we really just focus on phase one, which is the overbuild, which doesn't take into account a left or a right, then we could stay on track.
Phase one includes the floor above the cafeteria.
Correct.
Not the addition to the sides.
And I just put it out there,
Yep.
phase one, whatever you would like to see. Whatever you.
I was thinking we were going to clear on that if we get into a debate on whether the building needs to be symmetrical or not symmetrical, we could be debating this for the next 5 years and not move
Not
ahead on this
anywhere the
project.
First part.
Yeah.
Allison and then Butch.
Well, Steve's comment raises a second question. The first question is, so I think we're clear on the fact that we really, if we're wanting to get this done with ARPA money and with other monies, but if we want to move this ahead quickly, we need to come up with a figure that we would be presenting at budget adjustment. So my first question is, how do we arrive at that figure to move this along? That's question one. Question two is, my sense is that that we would be choosing a schematic design, a design that included all phases, but that we might move ahead, because I am not interested in looking at choosing a design bit by bit. You want to choose the whole design and then phase in the construction. But I think that a lot of us talked about this at the last meeting. You would not want to do it higgledy-piggledy by doing one thing and then designing another thing. You want to, I think, come to an agreement on a total design and then phase in construction. That was the sense from the last meeting that I took away.
You phase in construction based on the flow of available dollars.
Right.
So what you might end up doing is having the floor above the cafeteria, but you design the infrastructure
Right.
to accommodate addition later on in the future when the money's available.
When you know what, yeah.
That's how it may play out, because it's the dollars and when they're available that will really drive the construction.
I'm going to dovetail into Senator Clarkson's comment. I think we need to be very clear what we would be looking for in dollars for a BAA. And it's my sense that we would, correct me if I'm wrong, if you will, I don't. That it's my sense that we would be looking for the funds to do get us to design development. And not beyond that.
Right.
And there's a number, and I'm not sure, how do we ascertain that number?
I think we came up with $1 million or 1.5. I think it's a certain percentage of the overall cost of the project.
Mhm.
Is it 10%? Was it 10?
Yeah, it's about 10% for architectural fees, but then you also have commissioning that I also want to point out. You also have your fees for construction management. So let me explain a little bit more into this sketch. At some point after schematic design, once and even it could be before, actually, commissioning agents like to come in right from the get-go also, like everybody else, so that they're right on the ground floor to determine the best system requirements for the building and meet the owner's need. They basically coordinate, the commissioning agency coordinates the drawings and make sure that the existing conditions and the new conditions meet specification and the owner's requirements. So they're like a backup to overseeing everybody's work and making sure it is complete and thorough, and then they come through when all the machines are running too and make sure that everything's running according to the specifications, so that nothing, sometimes machines run backwards and you don't know for years that they're running backwards and they're pulling in air versus out, or it's just, anyway, they affirm everything. So a commissioning agent, especially in this building, I think is very important. And that is on line 22 on that, which is RFP to hire a commissioning consultant based on DD documents. So there's an extra cost, that's in DD, and also the other cost is to hire a construction manager. That should be in DD. And I didn't put just above that, that's 21, is to hire a construction. I think the best way to approach this project is through a construction management. It's kind of, it's a little early to be saying it, but to have that, them working with us through design development on also. So there's another additional cost there that we'll have to factor in above that 10% for A&E services. A&E, I think what we're using is about a $20 million estimate right now when we do quote that, so that 1.5 is not 10%, but it would cover those items. So 1.5 would be sufficient is what I'm saying.
1.5 million.
1.5 million.
I think it should be sufficient for covering it. Depends on how big of an expansion you do, you know, that's the.
Janet and Steve.
So I want to go back to this discussion about sort of the phase one, phase two, doing it all or doing it in pieces. And I guess the concern I have is that if we begin to talk about either going out on one side or another, we know that that's going to create more issues. And it also increases the cost, I assume. I don't know if the 20 million figure, that's a rough figure, but
That was based, yeah.
if that includes the building up as well as building out.
Just up,
No, up and out, I think.
up and out.
Yeah, in part, that was, I think Freeman had about a $20 million estimate. I'll have to pull that out again.
So that was my sense, and I think we do need to make a decision about whether we're going to do the schematics and the whole thing along the lines of what Allison described, or whether we're going to actually talk about a project that goes up. And I think, you know, I can think of good reasons to do it either way, but it does make a difference on what that base figure is that we're applying the 10% to.
Mine was just a further question on how the approval for the money flows. Tricia was talking about, which is listed in red here, funding available for A&E, for SDD, DCD, CC, all that stuff. That all happens after July 1. Does the budget adjustment just cover what happens this spring, and then what happens from July 1 forward go into the next budget? So we're talking about two different numbers there.
It could go into the 20, it could go to take care of the red bar there from July 1st through November. It could. If you have enough money, it will get you through there.
Yep. Wondering which way.
Depends how much money you put in. If you don't put in quite enough, then you can only get to a certain point.
Right.
So if you put in enough, it can carry you through, even though it's in that fiscal year, but it can carry you through.
And we can escrow.
So,
Janet?
This line does not have a whole lot of wiggle room
that's
in
correct.
regards to the 26 finishing of construction, which would mean then the ARPA money, how does that come into it? It would not be here, right?
Will not be, it's 26, you have to use up the ARPA, and we don't know how much ARPA money we will have for the legislative arena. We don't know. That will get figured out this coming session within discussions with the Senate and House Institutions Committees, with leadership and with the administration. That's how all that will get played out. So we won't know the results of that until May. I hope.
But there are other funding sources potentially available as well. I mean, there's the capital budget and bonding through that, and then there's also potentially more federal infrastructure funding.
That will all get figured out this next legislative session within the context of those conversations with the ARPA money that's coming through the capital budget, for the capital budget itself, with leadership and with the administration. A lot of moving pieces. A lot of moving pieces.
Trish, this monumental task needs to include revising the HVAC system, especially in the House committee areas. If we are focusing solely on building an addition to the cafeteria, I'm assuming that the HVAC system fix is going to be included in that conversation. But does it paralyze us if we try to anticipate building to the east or the west at the same time?
I do agree with Senator Clarkson that we need to plan the whole thing. That we have to look at the schematic design for the whole building initially, so that we know what sense of what systems are going to be, need to be extended. Will it paralyze us? It could, things could paralyze us because everything depends on if something's held up. Or, the whole timeline is just meeting that beat. If you can meet the beat of, if we can stay within this realm, then planning one year to do each phase is pretty much what it works out, that I think it is possible. And getting the right people, it's possible to do things. It's just moving forward and getting the decisions made on all sides.
Allison?
So I served on the State House Committee when we bogged down. And a part of the excitement of doing this work finally, almost 20 years later, it bogged down, Steve, I think mostly for political, it just the gas had been let out of the balloon. And I think people and so to me, part of the objective here is to keep the excitement. And once you sell a complete design and people are excited about it, it will hopefully keep that metronome moving so that we move that we keep moving on. So there may be 2 stages of building, but that our job really is to not let happen what happened before, which is to have the momentum be disrupted and to keep it going. Because I think COVID really has reinforced what we actually knew in 2005 and 6, but didn't have the political will to actually make happen. Is that fair, David? Is that? Yeah.
But there were a lot of factors that,
I
It was
think
the funding.
there were funding
Yeah.
things that
But-
changed.
like having private fundraisers to private money to build.
Yes, but that was part of it all comes from us.
Sure.
I mean, the will
I do
is,
agree.
yeah.
I do agree.
And an insult, Janet.
So, maybe I'm the only one, but I'm not convinced that there's going to be more excitement about the building up and out when there may be disagreement about building out. And so I'd like, and if I'm the only one, I'm the only one, that's fine. But I'd like to at least give some thought to, if we don't call it phase 1, doing a project that is building up, that would be the project. At least it solves some problems, it creates some others, but I don't want to leave the discussion without saying that I at least think that would be a better way to go. Based on what I know at the moment, which, I may learn things that change my mind.
Yeah.
Getting back to Senator Benning's question about the HVAC system, Senator Benning, are you talking about the present design now that we're going forward with?
I am not exactly sure how to answer your question, Janet, because I've heard it all over the map. we took our first tour.
Yeah.
I was under the clear impression that this was a question of swapping out coils or adding some building space to the current maintenance room in order to accommodate bigger machinery. Those two options, whichever one worked, was something that would cure getting the house committees to ASHRAE standards. That was clearly the impression I was left with. And if we accomplish anything out of this, we've got to accomplish that.
So
And
that
after
was
that-
my understanding, but I also thought if we were doing an addition from when I spoke to Freeman before and Joe Asia's here to comment, they were saying that if there was an addition, then
They would
we could
address-
accommodate it and
I
address
heard
it at
that
that
too.
time.
I think that's.
I heard that too.
But we still haven't figured out what
And that will be,
addition. we're
that will be coming
targeting.
end of October, I think, Joe, right?
That is correct. Meeting Friday.
We're anxiously waiting.
Thank you. So I think I agree with Senator Clarkson that we need to look at the big picture and a bigger design to get, so we know where we're going and what systems need to be in place and how it will, and to build excitement, et cetera. But can I ask someone to just give me like a 3-sentence description of the debate over which side of the building? I'm sorry if you've gone over this before, but what were the things that got it bogged down briefly? And you can tell me more at lunch, but I'm just confused a little bit why there was so much controversy.
One was the aesthetics and historical aspect of the view of the State House
Okay,
from State Street, and how there was some real concerns on the historical end. That's fair to say. The other piece is, we don't know what our space needs are going to be because of two things. We now have 2 and 4 Aiken, which when Feingold Alexander was done, we did not have 2 and 4 Aiken. When French Freeman was done this past session, we did not have 2 and 4 Aiken. So we don't know how that's gonna play into our space needs. The third is, we don't know, now that we've gone to a hybrid way of doing our legislative business, at least for this upcoming session, we don't know the number of folks who will be coming into the building.
but what was the controversy before? I get this new information, but what was the thing before that bogged it down between
So-
the side of the building?
There was a feeling that Feingold Alexander created something that a lot of people loved, which was restoring symmetry to the State House. And they did it by creating a wall that echoed the massing on the west side, on the east side. Behind that wall was a very contemporary addition that hid a major public hearing room that would have been behind the room 10 right here, over here, basically.
Okay,
And up on the hillside, space for, as Alice is suggesting, space for staff. So those spaces, half of the preservation community thought it was incredibly artful, and another group felt that it was a bridge too far. And that the view of the State House from the east would be significantly impaired, meaning you can see the whole original building from certain perspectives, not many, but certain perspectives, and that was compromising our future ability to appreciate the historic building from different angles, not just the front.
okay. So it was mostly a historic preservation discussion about which was the better design. It was not as much of a,
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with Allison, that the disagreement kind of caused the program to be to go through a lot of different phases. And as a result, by the time they were talking about money, the fiscal changes had taken place. And the air went out of the bag, so to speak, but it just kind of held it up, I would say. I would say no one ever came to any distinct conclusions about this. It just dragged it on.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
I was just gonna add, there were also some functional considerations. And when you think about the building, if we continued moving asymmetrical and talking about possibly a visitor entrance, the buses come in more easily that way. Our other buildings are that way. Away from town is that way. So there were some functional considerations besides aesthetic and historical.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful too, because I was wondering if it was mostly aesthetic and historical or if there were functional. So it was a mix of the three, but a lot of it was.
And Alice is correct. There were no discussions at that time about the staff going anywhere other than remaining in the State House at that time. So now there are discussions about moving functions of the State House possibly to surrounding buildings. That was not part of the conversation back then. And the other part is there was no big conversation about visitors to the State House and how best to serve them in general.
That's too bad. Okay.
But now that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, it wasn't left out of the conversation. It was part of it, but it wasn't.
It was
I
just
think
not
what
a
it's
driver.
driving at is, it's driving at what, you know, they had, Freeman French's proposal had a, what is it, open area for the classroom kids to come into or whatever, and for that public house to be more of a spot for visitors to collect and start from a starting point.
Yeah, I remember that.
But it's not, that doesn't preclude the Kleingold Alexander plan from working also, because it could be used as the inner courtyard that they show. Just having all an interior courtyard would be the gathering space for visitors to assemble before they move on. So there, meaning plans can be developed so that they meet your needs. We just need to, it's the massing of the building is going to be contentious. And I think that there's an easy way to carefully step it in and just do simple massing, and not say, you know, what it's gonna look like 100%, just what if we put a box here, or what if we put a box there, or, you know, if we did, you know, and then going through and saying, what does that box need to look like? Is it glass? Is it a backdrop, or is it a granite, or is it, you know, all these things that can be skinned, and as long as we can get the function to work within the space, and that's key, and then the form can develop.
Awesome.
And I think some things have shifted. I mean, we have a lot more visitors. This is now viewed as one of the top tourist sites in Vermont. I don't think that was the case in 2004, 5, 6. I mean, it's really grown our interpretive abilities, and it's being marketed on tours and stuff. It's just changed. I mean, I may be wrong, but I think that our visitorship has grown exponentially since that period. Am I correct in understanding that?
We've always had the benefit of the best marketing tool anyone can have, a golden dome on top of your building. They come, but so we've always been briskly visited, but I would agree with you that the services for visitors have greatly changed in recent years. Yes.
And the bulk of our tourists come in when we are not in session. Is that correct?
Well, yes, although we are the largest site during the session for school visitors.
For school.
Of any,
I'm talking about.
of any site in Vermont, we get more school children than
Right.
any other.
But I'm talking about the general public.
Yes, yeah.
Tourists from out of state and Vermonters coming in.
We have distinctly different,
It occurs when
audience.
we are not in
Yes.
session. So the use of the building is very, very different.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. So I have a question, and I'm going to target this to BGS. So if we did the floor above the cafeteria. And we built in the infrastructure in that construction to accommodate additions on either side of the building. What would be needed to build in that extra infrastructure? What items? Electrical, fire safety, sprinkler systems, HVAC? What would be involved off the top of your head? Can you give us some idea in terms of incorporating what would be needed in the future, doing it within that floor above the cafeteria? So that when a decision is made to add on to either side of the building, the internal infrastructure is in place. You see what I'm saying, Joe? And I don't know if you can answer that.
I think he's leaving.
A little bit.
Because we gotta get our heads around this. And we gotta start dealing with nuts and bolts.
For the record, Joe Aja, Buildings and General Services. To answer that question, I think is somewhat been answered already by others in the room, is that it's through the programming, the schematic design, so that you really know what your future is going to look like, then phase it, and then you go from there. And depends on what you're looking at in the future, you may not want to be sizing your heating, cooling, electrical service for that advancement right off, but have pathways to get them now. But that's really about starting in the beginning with the programming and what you truly need and go from there.
So you would have to make sure that your sizing of your heating system, your electrical system could handle a future addition.
You would size it for potential growth because you don't know. But if you go through the whole programming process and then through schematic design, you'll be able to locate, let's pick a boiler room mechanical space. You'll be able to pick that space at that point in time and say, this is where it's going to be for the potential future. It may be that you never get there, but at least you have the space now and you're not building a space. And then when you get to the future, go, I need 10 extra feet.
Right.
Similar to what we have with the HVAC system right now. We might have to do an addition, depends on what we're looking at. We're not sure yet, but when you look at the time that was installed in the 70s, throughout the 80s and 90s, it's different than we are with a big addition that you're looking for. But that would be the process.
And that's what they did back in the 80s, when they built the addition and put in the cafeteria. They constructed that as a load-bearing wing with the idea that down the road, future legislatures would put another floor above the cafeteria.
And that was a theory. Whether or not that's true, you do the structural analysis. Code has changed since then. So there still would be potential modifications for that. And that code being for both electrical, mechanical, and structural.
And we won't know that until we get into the schematic design.
It's not, it can be overcome though. You know,
Right, I know that.
it can be-
I know that, but I'm just saying, we won't know the answer to that one until we get into the schematic design. So, questions for Joe?
I'm not going far.
Thank you, thank you. Do we want to continue on this chart, or do we want to really bite the bullet and figure out, are we going to design for the first phase phases differently? How we're going to approach a future expansion of the State House? Yes, the immediate need is for a floor above the cafeteria. A future need would be possibly addition on either side or both sides of the building. So going out at this point, do we just look at program and design needs, schematic design for the floor above the cafeteria? Or do we look at the whole project knowing that the cafeteria piece is the first part of that. And to make sure that the internal mechanical is built large enough to incorporate additions on both sides when the time comes. Hannah?
So, I think to answer that question, we need to talk about what we would be using that space that we're building out on either side of the building for. So, I'm certainly, I think there's consensus around the need for additional committee space. And I think there's probably some consensus about having a better welcoming space for people who come into the building. We haven't talked a lot about that. But I at least couldn't make a decision about building out unless I knew what it was going to be used for.
So I think we need to know a lot more before we decide that. So the additions of 2 and 4A can shift it a bit. And I think so we need to know what the interests are of our staff for expanding into those 2 spaces and what the cost of totally renovating those 2 spaces would be for us to weigh whether the staff would be incorporated into a fuller design. So I think in some ways that's sort of a key decision that we have in the dominoes that need to fall in this puzzle of what we do. We know we need more legislative space. We know we need more staff space. And the question is, I think we have to resolve that question first, because if we're going to, so that does strike me as a key decision. Because I would have a very different sense if the staff was not wanting to be in 2 or 4 Aiken, then I think we are looking at a totally different State House space. If the staff are willing to look and are excited about what the possibilities are, I think it's a different discussion.
So then,
Or a slightly different
so
discussion.
then the question I think that's before us, are we chasing the money? Is that our priority? Are we chasing the money to get the money and get the construction done by 2026? Or are we willing to not chase the money and really look at our program needs and figure out where we will be with our programming, which probably we won't know until May of 22. That's the reality. That's the reality, because there's a lot of conversations that will be occurring outside of this group with a lot of other folks in terms of what 2 and 4 Aiken is going to be used for and when. And does that need to be resolved before there's any decision on how you move forward with getting into program needs of an expansion of the State House and schematic design? That's what's before us. Are we chasing the money? Is that our priority? Because if we're chasing the money, we can make some decisions that may look very financially astute at the time, but we may lose something of value in the long run that we may not be aware we're going to lose it until we lose it. That's what's before us, I think. Ruth?
So I think that we can both be, trying to think of the right phrase, fiscally practical and also ensure that we have, or do what we need to ensure that we have a good project. Because the ARPA money can be used for so many different things. We could use ARPA money and set aside the $1.5 million in the budget adjustment, that is what I've heard Tricia saying we need for the very first get going. And that can be the ARPA money, and we can use additional ARPA money as we go, but we don't have to necessarily fund the entire project with ARPA money and rush it to be done by 2026. I'd rather make sure that we are being respectful to the building and the history and the people of Vermont who care about this place and who are going to be using it for decades after we're all gone. And that we're getting the right use. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced that we want to build over the cafeteria. I don't know. I need more information. I haven't been doing this as long as Allison and Alice and others in the room, and David. But there are, as I said before, there are other funding sources that we could tap into to make sure that we can blend and combine with the ARPA money. The bonding and through the capital budget, the potential for more infrastructure funding. And I know that's a little riskier, but I don't think we can fund the entire thing with ARPA and do it in a way that is going to make sure that we are creating the space that we need in the State House.
Alice, may I ask?
So one of our primary goals for programming needs, more space for house committees. And that was first and foremost. So what we had been thinking was you put a floor above the cafeteria. You move the kitchen and the cafeteria to that floor. Because if you're gonna put anything, expansion, increase the space in this building, you've got to deal with the cafeteria, the kitchen, and the service area, because it's not appropriate for what is used now. And going in the future, we really, now's the time to address it. You're gonna do another floor. The space which currently houses the cafeteria and kitchen would be converted into 5 committee rooms, 6 committee rooms, 5 committee rooms. And the committee rooms, the middle committee rooms in the 30s were House Ag, House Institutions. In the 40s, which used to be House Natural, House General, the walls would be torn down and there'd probably be a wall put right in the middle of that committee room to expand the adjoining committee rooms. So on the House side, Commerce Committee would end up having a little larger room, Education Committee, a larger room, Judiciary would have a larger room, Ways and Means, and then upstairs. That was the thinking in terms of how to address the space needs within our House committees. That's the program need. And I'm gonna leave it at that.
Cafeteria.
In the cafeteria.
Right, improves the cafeteria.
And that's gonna be the bulk of the money for the addition, is moving that cafeteria in the kitchen.
Right.
That's gonna be the sucking sound for the dollar amount for that addition.
Just, to clarify, what shut the project down before was funding. So that, back in 2006, it was, a big part of it was the funding. So, running for the money that is federal funding that's available now to you,
We can do that. We can run for the federal funding, but we shouldn't rush it to get done by the time the ARPA money runs out. There are other funding sources that we can combine with ARPA to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to do the project right. I'm not saying we don't use ARPA. I'm just saying that we don't say we have to be done by the time the ARPA money expires or
just wanted to point that out. That was one of the reasons a big reason that it keep going.
And we won't know what our bonding capacity will be next fall of 22 or FY 24 and 25. We just don't know.
Depends on you know,
And we have a correctional facility,
yeah.
facilities that we are looking to replace. And we've got a lot of moving.
And we've been talking about it for 40 years, this position, so it's one of those.
And it's the political will as well. It's different in different parts of this building.
Right.
But our priority was the committee rooms on the house side for more space and airflow.
There seemed to be some concern that if we move forward, we could make some mistakes and wish we'd done things differently. I personally don't think that's a huge issue for us because you think out 50 years, for example, as long as we create spaces that are usable, we don't do stupid things like put columns everywhere where you can't renovate anything. You can gut a space and change it, 20 years, 30 years, as long as we've created something that is aesthetically functional, pleasing, and renovatable. Is that a word? Renovatable?
You just created.
They're dealing with a different building than a home or an office space. I just want to put that out. It's really difficult to renovate.
But if
This building.
you created a bunch of small rooms in a space, if you could take down all the walls and have a big room, then
It's like, and partly I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, as far as that, as long as it doesn't need water or sewer or something like that, that most of these spaces can become flexible, that you can change the use on them. Just because you call it, one use right now, like the infirmary, that's a good one, Now the infirmary is going away. Do you really need it? Well, then, but you need a single user bathroom more, so, and you need a lactation room. So now that was a trash room. I'm just using that as an example. Started as a trash room, then went to the infirmary, then went to a lactation infirmary, and now it's going to a single use bathroom in the lactation room. So there is flexibility, in part of spaces when they are.
Where are we, folks?
1.5 million for program.
1.5?
Yeah.
I was gonna. That's what I was gonna say. I like using the deadline of the money to help move us along.
Yeah.
In the process, because we could talk about it for the next 5-10 years, because we have the time. Now, this is saying, hey, let's get the work done and let's figure it out. If we're figuring out the whole project, great, let's commit to figuring out the whole project, but here's a good timeline to do it in. And to that end, I'd say we recommend that we try to go after the 1.5 million to start the process.
Thanks. So maybe a question for Trish. To the 1.5 million ask and budget adjustment, I think is appropriate at this time. We need some time to figure out whether we like Feingold, Freeman, or some mix of the two. One thing I've learned since I've been here, construction, nothing in construction is cast in stone except the State House. The State House is definitely cast in stone, so we have to be pretty careful what we do here. But should this committee decide to recommend, that's all we're doing, to the various other committees we recommend to, a move of lifting the cafeteria. When your professional opinion, would you say that we should make a decision, or do we have to make a decision based on the infrastructure needs of additions, Feingold style or F style? Do we have to make that decision now? Should we make that decision now, or can we still work in pencil and paper and our eraser? But still move forward on a cafeteria relocation project.
So the next phase for the programming, in that first box up there, that we would be, writing an RFP for services. So you'd have to go out you can't just hire, well, you could, because you guys are in a different world. But you should go do an RFP asking for proposals for all different architects and engineer services and review those proposals again. And based on the programs that you already have. And I would suggest like you did on Freeman French too, already, BGS did, is that they show them everything that we have today. They show them the Freeman French master plan, they show them this, the Feingold Alexander plan, and that I think a good point is that you say, we agree that we like the concept of the Feingold plan about the committee rooms being on the second floor, and that the cafeteria goes up on the third floor, and this kind of configuration, we think that's a good way to proceed and develop further the program for this, to see if, and whoever you hire for an architect, based on those programs that you're showing them, and saying, this is our concept, that we like this idea, that would be phase one. Phase two, we're looking at expanding to the left and the right, or to the east and the west, depending on what is being proposed and reviewed. But so we developed this RFP right now is the key, and put it out to architectural services right now. Now, we have done this before. When I was at BGS, we've done that base pending funding approval, which I've written that in March. So we would get everything, we review everybody's and we proposals, and the committee would just you appoint a committee to review each step of the process through all these design phases, to be the appointing authority for review and approval for moving forward with an architect, with a program, with a schematic design, with a design development, and so that that you can move forward on this project. So if you provided the information that you needed in the RFP, what you think that you would like it to be structured, this the program and of engineering services, and what you want the schedule to be, and who you're going to be working. As I propose that you work with a CM and also a commissioning agent, which you hire a commissioning agent, the architect doesn't, because they oversee, they look at their work. And you hire the construction manager for pre-construction services. And they tell you about constructability, of how, before they had to use horses to excavate this site up here. So, how they would envision this being done. And that team, building that team along with a committee that works, if everybody works together, it moves right along pretty well. If the team can meet the dates that those people you say, can we do this? So I think that the program itself and developing the program can go a bit further, but I think you're almost there. I mean, when we talked about it the other day, the committee rooms and but the big part of that program is deciding who you want to remain in the building, as you were saying before. And that hurdle of who moves over to 2 acres or 4 acres. They're being renovated starting soon. And the first and the second floor are being renovated, and the third floor eventually, hopefully, when time allows. But the rooms over there are being renovated to be used as offices. And they're ready to plug people in, they're fixed rooms, pretty much. You can put cubicles in some of the open spaces up there, which we've had, the last plan for those spaces worked well for the cubicles. And but the question is who goes over there, and making that decision who goes over there, that's gonna be another tough one, besides the massing of the building and who leaves the building. That is really what your biggest hurdle is.
Go ahead.
Another decision point, maybe. I've been sleeping on this one and they haven't figured it out yet. Right now, you're currently employed by the legislature, and outside of VGS. You're performing these services for the legislature, currently, Janet and her staff to do some of this work. If this was a capital bill project, we would have automatically included buildings and general services. But it's not.
At this point.
At this
It
point. it's
depends
all-
what entity is
Right.
gonna go out with that RFP.
Right, so it's outside the scope, I think, Alice, of the capital bill right now. It may or may not be.
It may or may not be.
Right, so at some point, though, there's going to be more work than Trish and Janet and her staff can do.
Your major construction.
Yes.
This is major construction, which is not our sergeant at arms office.
Right,
forte.
even reviewing the plans and all the various things that you can involve, I don't have to explain them to you. When does this, or should this committee, I think, make a decision to maybe invite BGS into the process? And then figure out the complications of that. And I think that's a big question that we have to figure out. And frankly, I don't think it's going to be free.
And they can't do anything until there's legislative approval for them to get involved,
That's
because
right.
they're the executive branch.
Right.
So they wouldn't be able to write the RFP right now for architectural A&E
They
services.
would not be able to. Is that what you said?
That's what I'm asking, yes,
I don't think they would, because there isn't any money appropriated
for that.
for that. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, there's nothing in statute, which is the capital bill, right, that directs us to do that work.
They would have to wait until the budget adjustment process of the general fund first. If that didn't go through, then it would have to wait for the capital bill process to go through this next session. But you can't jumpstart anything from now until you get something passed in the legislature to have BGS be involved. The issue that Butch brings up, this is major construction. You need people who know construction to be at the helm. It is not our sergeant at arms, and it is not Tricia herself being here as our consultant to help us with construction. I mean, it would end up being the sergeant at arms that holds the contract. And working with construction folks. I don't know if we want to put our sergeant at arms office in that position or not. That's a real major.
Well, in the past, sometimes we have, as a legislature, asked JFO to administer some of our smaller contracts and construction contracts for the State House. But I even think, my personal thought is it's even outside of their wheelhouse now and their expertise to embark on the start of a potential large construction project.
Oh, yeah.
And BGS is in the helm, is the lead entity for our HVAC system. So Joe, Ruth, Allison.
Trish, as I was listening to your description of what needed to go in the RFP, it dawned on me that there was an assumption we were going to build up. And I've heard several people comment that we don't know whether we can still build up as was anticipated however many years ago. Due to code changes, due to possible architectural problems. I mean, is that a cart before the horse kind of thing? How do we figure out first whether you can do it before you send out an RFP suggesting how you do it?
I actually, in the Pine Gold Alexander plan, they did review that structure in the back, and that was in 20 years ago.
Right.
But it was sized for the dead load. Again, most structures can be sistered, or, you know, a structure can be reinforced if it needs to go up. I don't see a problem with it going up. And they didn't see a problem back then. The only thing that they were concerned about that the lateral load wasn't addressed then, which is, again, adding diagonals or, and again, it's just shoring up a building in a specific way. It's nothing that can't be addressed.
So in your opinion, there's no potential code hurdle, nothing that would suddenly say, wait a minute, you can't do that.
Nothing that can be designed around.
That design around would have to be part of the RFP?
Part of the RFP, it would have that information because that's in the program already that Feingold has written out, that they said, oh, there's, we need to review this further, but as we see this on the cafeteria, to go above the cafeteria, it was planned to go above the cafeteria, and our analysis of the structure, it says in there, it is, will meet the current code, and lateral needs to be addressed. So yes, it would be, we can write these things out specifically in the RFP about what is being done, but they're reviewing. When they come in, if the architect comes in, they're gonna be starting from scratch almost anyway, besides what we can have. So they're going to review this building because they've got to stamp it, they've got to license it, and they've got to make sure that everything works. So we can provide them this information, but that is still going to be reviewed when they hire a structural engineer, because it's their liability that they make sure that is going to work. And if it doesn't work, how do you make it work? By adding more structure. So.
Flying buttresses.
Yeah, and as you went up in the dome, you can see what structure was added in the dome, and we still need to add more structure up there too. And so it's again, it's doable. I think it's, the question is, the biggest question now is how you were going to proceed with moving forward on this project. If, like, I could draft you the RFP up, I could write the RFP and we could put it out, we could do the process that I did at BGS.
But you don't have the money to do that.
Or, yes, well,
That's the key.
you don't have the money, the 1.5, but it would be based on approval of that 1.5. If that was something you could see happening.
But if you're the one that drew up that RFP, but ultimately the Sergeant at Arms office is not the one that's going to be in charge of this construction. If it's VGS, would they accept your RFP as written, or would they go out and write their own?
Well, that would be the question is, would they review the RFP for us, or whatever you get approval for?
Okay, that's a whole separate issue that needs some conversations. We can assume that, but I wouldn't want to go down that road without knowing the specific. Ruth, Allison, Janet.
Thank you. So a little bit what I was going to ask, and then I have a couple other questions, was after what Butch was saying about the process and getting BGS involved. I mean, we can put in the in the budget adjustment, the authorization for BGS's involvement, and that would be hopefully, passed and done by March, 1.5 million. But before then, can't we, we can ask BGS right now if there's a way that they can be involved with Tricia and making sure that things are at least going in the right direction. So that when we get off the ground, if, I don't want to put you in an awkward spot, but it seems to me like we're all in the room right now. Is there a way that we can get it rolling with your involvement until we can make it official?
Remember, we've got a separate branch of government.
I understand that, but
Together their
We have a
budget.
commissioner right there.
We have a,
We have two people.
we have a separate branch of government where that executive branch is formulating their current budget proposals for FY '23 that may not include any money for legislative expansion. Because this is coming from the legislative branch. This expansion, it is not coming from the executive branch.
I understand that. So that's not what I was asking. I understand that. I'm more
You are asking that.
what I was asking was Tricia mentioned she could do the RFP. And then there was the question of whether then once BGS is involved, would they just redo the RFP? And what I was saying is there a way that Tricia could just work with BGS right now to sort of make sure that her RFP is matching the specifications of BGS? And then when we pass the budget adjustment, then they can hit the ground running. That's what I was asking, not whether or not they're going to include it in their capital request. it's more of a, can there be some sort of informal collaboration?
There already is.
I think you're being put on the spot.
I'm totally being put on the spot. So Jennifer Fitch, BGS Commissioner. So the answer is, unfortunately, I can't answer that question in this very moment. And here's why. To Madam Chair's point, we get projects that are allocated to us in the capital bill. And I have limited resources, and those resources have to work on the projects, right, that have already been funded. So right now, Joe is down 4 positions, and we have a lot of projects that we're trying to get out the door. So that isn't to say that we couldn't collaborate. I just can't answer that question at this point in time, because I would have to go back and really talk with Joe about, he's got to get projects out the door that have already been funded. So I have to make sure he's got resources to do that. Well, that is answering my question, actually. Thank you. Because I mean, that's just sort of what, what is the capacity? And that leads into my other questions, which was one, this is a nice timeline, but we all know that there are labor shortages everywhere, and whether or not that has been factored into the timeline we're going to probably have labor shortages for the next couple of years at least, and whether that's been factored into the timeline. And then the other questions I had was about accessibility. The State House, the way it's designed right now, it is really difficult to access the elevators. And if we're building up another floor, wanting to make sure that that is considered and in whatever process, because it seems to me that our accessibility issues are pretty high. And then finally, security issues. Things have changed. This is another thing that's changed a lot this year after the January 6th thing. And I know we've had the chief in the room for a lot of these conversations, but just making sure those are part of the process too. So it's not just about space, but it's about accessibility and security. Those are my 3 questions.
So I just wanted to answer on fire safety is in charge of the accessibility portion and reviewing the project. So that's all part of that. So as far as developing the project, that is the requirement for an architect is to develop it according to the fire safety and the means of accessibility and working. We would put that all in the RFP for them to.
Okay, it's not just about fire safety though. It's about
No, well, but fire safety is accessibility. It's under their.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And security.
And security would be part of working with the client in developing the program, because the client is part of Capitol Police and part of that. Yes, it would be included and understood that was all part of it.
It's just if you're building up in an already tight space and making, a 3rd floor on a tight space, security and accessibility seem to be issues that would be particular challenges. And then did you factor in the labor shortages into the?
Now, I haven't factored, this time schedule is if things go at a certain beat. Now, who is to know what the labor and also material is going to be like in a couple of years or a year? But that's why I'm saying hire a CM, because it always has a pulse on what's going on in the build and how to build it and how to get material, or if they're even going to be able to do this, or what materials, if you put in a material and that it's a long lead time on it or whatever. So it's developing a team that can move a project forward in these times, and what that time is, I am not sure right now. Some things you can get done, some things you can't get done. So it depends.
Allison and then Jana.
Gosh, I sort of had forgotten what I was going to ask, but I think one of the things, Trish, you said that concerned me is, and this may just be me, but as we look at 2 and 4 Aiken, I had thought that if Ledge Council was willing to move to 2 and 4 Aiken, that we would be doing a massive rethink of those 2 buildings. That we wouldn't just be painting and doing a little bit of renovation. We'd be doing a serious looking at that staff need, so that we'd have all the staff in those 2 buildings and that they would be working with to design and totally redo those two buildings to suit their needs. So I guess, I mean, so for me, that's why it fits into a major, our major work that could conceivably be in stage one, building out above the, building a third floor and doing that work. But again, that is a decision, that Ledge Council is going to have to decide with us. And ideally, they say, ideally, we really want to be part of the State House solution. And we don't, want to do 2 and 4 acre, at which point we then, I suppose, turn back to the executive branch and say, is there another higher and best use in the administration for those buildings? And then we do a massive renovation, because clearly those 2 buildings need massive renovation and rethink. So I'm not sure where some of those decision points come, because I think Ledge Council our staff needs are big too. And not just our committee rooms, but our staff needs are substantial. They've been divided. They are working in separate buildings now. I mean, they've got to do their own needs assessment of what they want. And we then either need to incorporate it into our big vision, or into our big vision that has, is has 2 and 4 acres as part of it.
Those are very big questions those are hurdles that you need to lead
But we need a time frame for that, for those to build into this too, I think, for us to know what we're looking at in terms of big vision design.
So which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, exactly.
So Janet Ansel, then Janet Mills.
So just a couple of comments, and I'm trying to remember, my earlier one was a long time ago, so that train may have left us out, but I'll try it. In terms of the staff, I've just sort of been trying to think this through. Whether we do phase 1, phase 2, or whether we just do one project, which is sort of where I'm leaning. If until phase 2 is completed, the staff will either stay where they are or move to 2 acre. And I guess the question I have is that where they are now isn't going to be used for anything else. So it's going to remain as, in my opinion, completely inadequate office space, but it's there. So I'm just making sure that I'm correct about that. The other issue I was going to bring up, which, as I said, I may have totally forgotten, but I think I heard you say that you could do the RFP, and then there was a question about whether you had the resources to do it. And the question I raised last meeting, and I'd ask it again, is that we approved $750,000 to the Sergeant at Arms for I found it for pre-session facility needs, but it also says provide generally for space needs for the upcoming session and beyond. And the question I have is whether any of that money remains to facilitate doing the RFP now.
Janet.
So in my mind, the RFP project could be done by Tricia. We are a separate branch of government. I don't think we're going to be we've hired Tricia anyway, but we've contracted with her for the year. So I think that could fall into her duties of working for the Sergeant at Arms. So the money that we were allotted, the $750,000, we are working through some of that. Some of that has been going to construct renovation in 2 Aiken, and we're doing things there because we do have additional staff from all parts of everywhere that need a place to go. So the work that we're doing there, hopefully, we've tried to go in a direction where it will not negate any other work that is going to be done over there. These are still historic buildings, so some of it, and David, you can chime in on this, but we want to keep a certain position about these houses. Is that true, David? I mean, with some things we're trying to keep within the way they are now, without, knocking too much down and being able to use them as is. So the renovation that we're doing there is behooving that, working on that. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't go forward with the RFP ourselves.
Right.
And maybe Jennifer, do you see any pitfalls with that? Because we would just be putting it out. We would get the results and then that's only giving us one piece. And then we go on to the next part of the schedule.
So the question is, would BGS accept those results? Because I don't envision your office being the point of contact for major construction.
Correct.
So ultimately, it will be BGS that will be working with these construction documents and the physical building. So the RFP sets that groundwork in terms of hiring an architect and a construction manager, correct?
True, but I think if we've hired Tricia to work through some of that stuff to help us understand this and to work through it. And when Trish was talking, and I actually had to leave, but I was listening to the conversation, hiring a construction manager, right? Like when we did the dome,
That's right.
we hired people that we worked, not me, but I was just sitting in on the meetings and we were talking to them directly and there was a different entities from all sides here. So
It's something, it's a new arena in terms of having the
It
RFP written up by the entity that's not going to ultimately be in control of the construction.
Right, and it's just the architectural services, you know, in the degree that, I don't know, you know, and reviewing the process and, you know, if BGS can be part of that committee that reviews that's part of the interview committee. If they're sitting here, why couldn't they be part of it?
Right.
You know, interviewing for the process but I'm not sure where that line is.
I don't think anyone is sure where that line is.
right.
So I think one of the things I've loved about COVID and our response and our work together is that the administration and the legislature have been working so well together and so constructively. They're in the room now. I mean, they've been part of this process. They know what our needs are. I think that if there is an opportunity, and Jennifer is going to get back to us about hopefully being able to in a consulting capacity if Trish needs it. I'd say I agree. I mean, Trish, I agree with Janet. We've done the RFP for other projects here at the State House. Let's at least get this process started. And if Jennifer can come back to us in a few days and say, yes, we could do a little consulting to make sure that we're all on the same page for this RFP, that would be great. Because it strikes me that part of what we're trying to do is break down silos. This building serves all of Vermont, not just the administration, not just the legislature, not judiciary. It serves everybody. So everybody should be involved in the process, which we sort of are, except we don't have any judiciary members here. But it does strike me, this is not a hard egg to crack here. We should be able to do this and move forward.
So I'm going to push this along. I think we need to focus first. And I'm thinking here, because we're spinning our wheels. When I'm thinking we get the 1.5 million, make a motion to make that recommendation, that we look towards our House and Senate Appropriations Committees to work within their budget adjustment for the 1.5. Then we take lunch, and then we'll come back and try to figure out this RFP issue. Maybe we'll have some answers through a lunch break. I'm not sure, but at least let's get the 1.5 million off the table.
So moved.
Yeah, so move second.
So what's the motion?
That we recommend the respective appropriations committees secure 1.5 million for programming Budget Adjustment Act. I don't know how to define programming for their purposes. But that's the sum and substance of the motion.
And Allison, you seconded?
I'm happy to second it. I like working with Joe. We should make more motions together.
It's been moved and seconded.
Let me think on that, okay?
Is there further discussion? Do people want to call the roll or a show of hands?
Joe,
I'm just wondering, I'm not sure what that programming word means.
It means
Context.
updating existing programs, figuring out the programs that you're going to need for the State House expansion, that then feeds into how your schematic designs are going to be laid out.
it's identifying the needs.
Mhm, okay.
So are people comfortable with a show of hands?
So can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So this is the 1.5 of ARPA money that we're recommending be included in the budget adjustment. That's what the motion is, right, Joe?
Be for ARPA money.
Yeah,
Correct.
Specifically ARPA, okay.
Can I ask clarification?
Yeah.
It's for architectural services, including programming, schematic design, and design development?
Yes, it's going to be beyond the programming. It's to get you to and through the schematic design.
right.
Right?
Yes, and into design development too.
I don't have that there.
So you just said it's beyond programming. The motion says programming. Do we need to? Word
Yes,
it differently.
programming and schematic design, I'll move to amend.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm right with you.
And can you put in design development if funding allows?
Someone said,
I think.
And design development if funding allows. Sounds good.
Yes.
Done.
Are you writing this down?
Wait, Butch has a,
Somebody better be writing this down, please.
What?
Someone read the motion back.
So Joe is
Writing
writing
this
it. so
down?
I'm
Joe
trying to
can
help.
read it.
I got lost a little bit, but
Yeah,
a little clarifying question though. I hesitate to say using ARPA money in budget adjustment. And I think that we would be put too deep in the weeds there. I think we should let our appropriations committee figure that out. They could have a windfall somewhere, you know, and not,
it'd be a waterfall.
okay.
We used to have waterfalls all the time.
We did.
Big ones.
So I would think, I would hope that the recommendation would be just for the 1.5 million in budget adjustment for the purposes that you've just listed.
For programming.
Yeah.
For programming that then leads into schematic design and then possibly design documents. But before you get into
Design
design documents,
Design development.
development
Design
documents, you need the approval that you're headed in the right direction on those schematic designs.
And the program first.
And the program first.
Schematic design approval with estimate. All phases have a stop point, a hard stop that some appointed committee has to
You
review.
know, well, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
The appointed committee may be your standing committees in the legislature. You don't know.
It's just, there's review processes at the end of programming by the legislature and the owner and then the schematic design development. Each time there has to be active review and approval of that process.
And if that happens out of session, standing committees don't have the authority to act unless it's joint fiscal committee.
And most of them I did put one in November.
So can you, Joe,
I believe the motion would be that we are recommending 1.5 million for programming, schematic design and development if funds are available.
Design development.
design
Design
development.
development.
I thought it was for budget adjustments
It is.
specifically.
In the budget
In
adjustment.
budget adjustment.
I mean, that's a key piece. to
Yes.
me.
For
That is the piece. And you're
Okay, I'll
absolutely.
try the whole thing
You
again.
gotta say.
Ask
motion,
for 1.5 million from
In
the House and Senate Appropriations Committees for programming, schematic design, and design development if funds are available during the budget adjustment.
I wouldn't put if funds were available.
That's no.
That's just for the,
It's flying off the
I know,
road,
but I would-
Trish.
right.
Okay.
I wouldn't put that in.
And design development in the budget adjustment process.
General fund budget
Mhm.
adjustment process, so we don't confuse it with the capital bill. budget adjustment. General fund, budget adjustment.
It may not be general funds. If we're using ARPA, it's not general fund.
Yeah, I would just,
ARPA.
I wouldn't identify
I
where,
wouldn't identify general fund either. Oh, budget,
Just say budget
budget
adjustment.
adjustment.
but
In the legislature.
Allison?
so the only thing I would change in that is 1.5 million in budget adjustment. And put that at the top, because that's what we're really asking for, is to get the 1.5 million
In the budget
to the
adjustment.
budget adjustment. So I'd lead with that right after the 1.5
We are
million.
recommending to our House and Senate Appropriations Committees that 1.5 million in budget adjustment be appropriated for programming, schematic design, and design development.
For the renovation of the State House.
The expansion.
For architectural and engineering services.
Yeah,
Are we
and
ready?
the expansion of the State House. We do have to mention our big purpose.
We can't even make a motion.
How is this recommendation getting to the powers that be?
It will get there.
Handle.
Are we writing another report or what are we doing?
Well, that's,
Are we writing a letter?
we can make a recommendation. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get it there, but,
Wordsmithing, and I was wondering.
we have to be very clear on the motion.
Maybe we
People will
could
come
take
back to that, but we make our recommendations to the Joint Management Committee and joint rules. That's what's written, the way it's written in session law, whatever, however we made the changes there for this use of the State House for January and then the expansion. That's not to say that our respective chairs of appropriations committees won't know within a few hours what's being requested.
So is our communication going directly to the Joint Legislative Management Committee or joint rules to further recommend to the House and Senate Appropriations Committees?
Joint rules, right? Because that's where we went last time.
I think it is. I think our recommendations to Joint Management Committee and joint rules that we recommend to our House and Senate appropriations, the 1.5 of the budget adjustment be allocated for program development, schematic design, and design development documents for the future expansion of the State House.
Did you write all that down?
No. I can type it up
You
right
got
here.
most of it.
Don't ask me to repeat it. It's on YouTube. That's the motion, I do believe.
It is.
Okay. Any further discussion? And we've got this on YouTube in terms of what I just said. In the old days, we had it on our CD that we could just play it back, right? I don't want to be flippant about it, but I think that what I stated is really sums up that we have to make a recommendation to the Joint Management Committee and joint rules. And our recommendation is that we recommend to our House and Senate Appropriations Committee that budget adjustment is 1.5 million
Good catch.
for program needs, schematic design, and design development documents, State House expansion. Any further discussion, and we'll do a show of hands. Does that work for folks?
Perfect.
And David, you're not a voting member,
No,
so we're all here except for one person. I do believe. Yeah. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. 10, right? Those opposed, please raise your hand. 1. Is that right? Do we have 12 of us? Yeah. Let's take a break. Let's go to lunch, folks.
Are we reconvening?
1:45. Does that work?
Great.
45-minute lunch? That work for folks?